All right. Welcome again. My name is Katie Wilson. I am the faculty researcher in our Research and Equity Office. I'm joined today by Maisie, Yolanda, Jason, and Shara, who are some of our amazing content area experts. Some of them are here right now, and some of them will join us in a few minutes for a panel. Prior to asking them some questions, I'm going to go through some logistics about student learning outcomes assessment at CRC. And thank you again for being here. This is a photo of my dog over the holidays. I hope everyone had a great break. And thank you for joining us to pause as he is doing and think about outcomes assessment before we start the crazy semester. And also on that note, let's take a second to pause and acknowledge that CRC sits on the land of Miwok and Nishinan people. We remember their continued connection to this region and give thanks to them. And we certainly offer our respect to their elders and to all Miwok and Nishinan people of the past and the present. Before I start, I want to talk about some acronyms that might come up in my presentation. So apologies if I say CIPS instead of the College Integrated Planning System. That is our technology platform in which all of our outcomes assessments are reported along with program review. You might have done one of those activities in the past. So CIPS is the College Integrated Planning System. And then we're here to talk about student learning outcomes, or SLOs. This is a general statement of the measurable skills and abilities a student will possess upon successfully completing a course, a program, or their time here at the college. We'll talk about the various types of SLOs as we continue. So at CRC, we have a whole page dedicated to learning outcomes assessment. I'll show you all that in a second. When this presentation becomes available, the link is here. The first thing we have are institutional learning outcomes, and this are the statements of the knowledge and skills that all graduates who complete an associate's degree or an ADT will have upon completion of any of those degrees at CRC. It doesn't matter which one, it's the general institutional learning outcomes. We assess those via our graduate exit survey, which you might have heard me present about at maybe Academic Senate or the Participatory Governance Committee. That is not the focus of today's session, however. Today we're going to be focusing highly on our program learning outcomes, which are those learning outcomes that are specific to your programs, and our course learning outcomes, which are those statements of the skills, knowledge, or abilities that students obtain when they successfully complete a course. And these are the statements that you see listed on your syllabi. We also have service area outcomes, which are those same outcomes applied to the service area that supports students. So it could be a student services program or also an administrative area such as my office, the research office. We also have service area outcomes that we assess. Thanks, Sabrina. Sabrina, I'm just going to ask you to unmute yourself and draw my attention somewhere if I'm needed.
Okay, yeah, no worries. I'll take a look at the chat. I was just mentioning, so when Katie mentioned your syllabi, I was just a reminder to continue to use consistent language as it appears on your course outline of record for the course being taught.
Thanks, Sabrina. So taking a step back, some of us might know outcomes assessments as kind of like, or learning outcomes as a product of our accreditation. And it is true that assessment is tied to accreditation. It's not the only reason that we write student learning outcomes or we take a look at whether or not we are delivering those outcomes to our students. But it is something important because to function as an institution, it is really great that we have an accreditation. Um, so the specific standard from our accrediting body that we meet in terms that applies to student learning outcomes assessment is standard 2.9. And it asks us to conduct systemic review and assessment to ensure the quality of our learning and student services programs. Our creditors say that some of the evidence we might provide to show that we are assessing our programs are documentation of our processes for program review and outcomes assessment, as well as examples of completed assessments. And here in orange at the bottom, I have highlighted these examples outline how results inform improvements in curriculum design, service delivery, and/or teaching and learning practices. The focus of our accrediting body is less so that we're doing outcomes assessment, so the rote activity of filling in our assessments, and more so on how do our assessments inform our practices. So continuous improvement. And I'm highlighting this because I've heard from folks that sometimes a fear is if I say that my students aren't meeting my student learning outcomes in my course, what does that mean for me? Is somebody does that reflect negatively on me? And I'm sharing this because that's not actually what our accrediting body cares about, saying, oh, 100% of our students are meeting our learning outcomes. It's actually more so that we're able to use learning outcomes to critically assess the services that we're offering and continuously improve those services to the benefit of our students. So that is their focus. This is somewhat of a new focus if you've been here for a while. It used to be more so what percentage of your courses are assessed. And now it's, yes, what percentage of your courses are assessed, but also how are you using those assessments as an institution to improve your programming? And just as a fun fact, we are in the middle of an assessment cycle. So in spring 2023, our accreditation was reaffirmed. In fall 2026, so this coming fall, we have a midterm accreditation report that's due. And in that report, we'll talk about our assessment processes, and hence this training is really great and timely because hopefully at the end of this term, we'll have a lot to say in that report about how we're using assessment on campus. In spring 2029, in a few years, but it sneaks up on us pretty quickly because we have to start getting our teams together to write all this information out. That's when our next institutional self-evaluation report will be due. Sabrina Sensel, who's our accreditation liaison officer, she is here today. So if anyone has specific accreditation questions, we can get those answered at the end. And then one more nuts and bolts before I dive into how exactly do I actually conduct a student learning outcomes assessment. We have a really cool committee on campus, the Ensuring Learning Committee. This is a group of faculty who are talking about meaningful outcomes assessment, making sure that the process serves our faculty, but also our students ultimately. Our goals for this year are to understand our current assessment processes and also hear from folks how those processes are working or maybe not working for them. We conducted a survey in the fall. Thank you for those who took it. If you did not see that survey, still feel free to reach out to us with your feedback. We want it, we need it, and we promise to listen to it and take it into consideration. You might hear from us more at the Academic Senate this term because we're developing a clear timeline documentation and examples for folks. These are things that we've heard that our faculty need to help them conduct outcomes assessments. Okay, hopefully this demonstration will help answer some questions. I'm going to pause just for a second.
Does anyone have any questions kind of about the background or the structure, kind of the stuff, the information that Katie shared before we go into the demo? There's so many of you here. We're not going to assume everyone is on the same page or starting from the same place, but we are going to, we are working from an assumption that we need to start from the very beginning and make sure everyone has the same information so that you feel confident in completing your course student learning outcomes assessment work. So just taking a look at the room. If you have a question, raise your hand, or you can unmute. We have a lot of time today, so I just want to make sure you don't feel rushed. Demo will be really helpful, but are there any questions? That's someone coming in. If I can, Katie, before you start, a lot of what tends to feel about assessment is that it's this other element, like outside of the work we do. And truly, I think what we hope to get out of this is also what we've managed to develop in our experience helping faculty and classified and administrators through program review. Meaningful reflection towards the intention of just institutional wide improvement. Your assessments are definitely a reflection of the work you want to accomplish and the changes you all want to do. And while yes, accreditation is kind of like the floor of like it has to be done in a sense, we do want this exercise to have meaning and purpose that drives your not just program review and requests for resources, but also just the ways in which we build community and collegiality around talking about what could be done in our classes, in our services, more collectively. It does feel much siloed, especially in certain classes where it may just be you teaching. But generally, what we try to develop in this experience is opportunity for conversation, dialogue, and support. And whether that's just with us and you're meeting with us and we're helping you through it, or whether it's in your department or as a college, I just want, I hope that I can share that this is our intention and that it's not meant to be daunting, but one that empowers and supports meaningful change and improvement across the campus. So I didn't get a chance to say that earlier, and Katie didn't know I wanted to say that, but I just thought I'd insert it here because there's a lot of care and support built into this process. And we definitely want to make sure that folks feel that they have the information they need both from themselves and their classes and the structure to move things forward. So thank you.
Thanks, Sabrina. As I continue with the demo, please feel free to put in the chat, raise your hand, or just unmute if I can pause anywhere for discussion. So I wanted to back up all the way to our website. If you go to the employee side of the website and to the employee login, thanks for Jason Patterson for always reminding me of this because I often forget. Our college integrated planning system is one of our tools that we can access right from the same place. We find Canvas and employee self-service. So if I click on the CIPS link, it should bring me to our CIPS platform. I am already logged in, but if you're not logged in, it will ask you to do so, and you can use your WID and password to access it. If you are a new faculty member or a new staff member, you might not have access to CIPS. Just send me an email. I'll share my email at the end and we can get you access. Just pausing for a second, it will bring you to the home page. And right here at the top, we've got a cool introduction to CIPS. I'll invite all of you to watch that, especially as you go into program review and unit planning, because I'm not covering those today. So we do have a flex session right after this that will talk about that. For the sake of time, I'm just going to jump to assessment reporting. You can click on it here on the home page or at this tab at the top. And this is kind of to expand on what Sabrina just shared. Assessment reporting, I know that we do in a very holistic, caring fashion at CRC. I imagine that folks are thinking about their outcomes throughout the semester. And it's hard to maybe quantify in just a few data points. Assessment reporting is kind of the act of trying to take all of those reflections together and think about how we might use our student learning outcomes and student attainment of them to inform future planning. And CIPS attempts to provide a tool for us to do so. In this assessment tab, we've got three different categories. One is for our instructional programs, one is for our student services and student support programs, and the third is for administrative and instructional support services programs. I see folks from all three of those groups here on this call, so we'll go over all of them. For our instructional programs, if you ever forget anything mentioned in this video, we do have a video tutorial at the top for submitting course learning outcomes assessments, and more video tutorials will come for our other areas. So that is a resource for you. If you have colleagues who were not able to be here today, you can also point them to that video. I'm going to jump into perhaps one of the first things we do, which is our course SLO assessment process. When you click that link, you'll see a list of programs here, so you'll need to identify yours. I'm going to scroll down to my sandbox. And over on the right, you'll see select a course. So hit that link, and then it should list all of your courses for your program. I get a lot of questions about courses that are maybe going through a deletion process or haven't been offered in a while. Those will probably still be here. We do a push from Socrates to CIPS annually, so there is sometimes a lag when courses that haven't yet been deleted are still listed. It's okay. I would recommend focusing on the courses that you are offering accurately or that you are currently offering. Don't worry too much about those courses that have less relevance at the moment, and we can work through that together. So for this sandbox, I've only got 3 courses here.
There's a question from Robert. Does that include new programs? So like as new courses come on, they may not appear, correct? Like it may take, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Robert. So I believe our last push from Socrates was in August. If a course has been created since then, it would not be here. That's something that I can probably work one-on-one with you to sort out. I can help you get the assessment done and figure out that process. I believe our next push will be in May or June. So there's about a year lag there. Oh, awesome. Hi, Robert. It's nice to meet you and welcome. And I will go over the program assessment process in a second, so that will also apply for you. Yeah, let's work one-on-one and work through that. I can help make that easier for you. So if your program does exist on that list, you'll go ahead and click on it, and then you should see all the courses from your program. You'll see a status. The assessed versus not assessed indicates whether or not the course was assessed in the current assessment cycle. Our assessment cycle is 6 years long, so that might help answer some questions about why something wasn't assessed. It means it wasn't assessed within the 6-year cycle. And it also, if your course has been assessed, it lists a date of the assessment there. You'll have the ability to submit new assessments for those courses. And super important fact here, if you submit a new assessment, it does not override the existing assessments. You can see them all. So if you're working with multiple faculty in a department, certainly dialogue amongst yourselves how you want to conduct assessment. But if you decide that everyone submits their own, you can hit this link to view previous assessments, and you can see that I actually have several assessments for this outcome, and these all could have been done by different people. So don't worry about overriding anything. You won't do that. And with that, if I go ahead and submit a new assessment, it will bring me to this page with lots of information that I can fill in. So this is where I'll pause. I just mentioned if you have multiple faculty in a department, you might want to work together to think about how you're going to do assessment. Every department does it differently. That's why we're having a panel conversation right after this to kind of hear from some of our departments about how they're conducting assessment. And it's ultimately up to you all how you want to do it. I've worked with folks where every instructor does their own assessments on a sort of regular basis. I've also worked with folks where one person submits one assessment on behalf of everyone. That is your choice. And if you want, I can come to department meetings to kind of walk through the pros and cons of all the different options. In this case, if it's just me, I would say I'm just one person and I can list my name. This is to help folks in the future kind of know how I was doing assessment at the time. My colleagues can look and say, oh, only Katie contributed to this one and not her whole office. How many sections of the course are contributing to the report? I might want to look at my section in fall 2025. Or I might want to look at all my sections across the past 3 terms. Those are all options. It kind of depends on you as an individual and what works best for you. If you're just getting started with outcomes assessment, I might recommend just looking at one section and one term. That seems simplest. So for this example, I'm going to say that I was looking at one section and it's going to be fall 2025. So I'll just say fall 25 to fall 25. But if, for example, I was looking at multiple terms, that might have been fall 24 to fall 25. And this is all just contextual information for you and your colleagues. So that's what that is for. When you look back at assessments, you kind of know when this course was assessed, the date range it was assessed for, that kind of thing. It's all for you. And then we have something that sounds really simple and maybe is not so much. We just ask you to associate each course outcome with the most appropriate proficiency level. So in this course, I believe I only have one outcome: learn to analyze statistics and write a scouting report. I think Paul wrote this about baseball. Student learning was below expectations, met expectations, or exceeded expectations. That is based on the data that you use, and that is up to you. I'll go in through the different assessment methods down here. And I have heard some feedback that folks find it easier to say students met the expectations or did not meet. This is kind of where we say this is a process that you own and you can kind of think of how you want to use these different proficiency levels. For the sake of this example, I'll say students overall met the expectations of this particular outcome. To get to that conclusion, I personally used maybe final exams and analysis of student work. This is multi-select. And we also have this other option if how you assess your learning outcomes is not on this list. A little dialog box about what you learned from your outcomes assessment. Again, this is context for you and your peers. And then kind of what our accrediting body is really interested in is identifying the type of instructional changes, and then down here, curricular implications that I've learned from conducting this assessment. So say that I'm assessing a course and my students are doing super well in 3 of my outcomes, and maybe in another one, I'm noticing that not as many of them seem to be mastering that outcome. I might want to look at my particular teaching methods as they relate to that outcome. I might want to spend more time on that particular outcome. I might want some PD or a change to the syllabus, or I might actually not know, and I want to conduct further assessment related to what's going on. And I might describe kind of what I'm seeing in this box. And same thing with the curricular programmatic implications. We have had programs who conducted assessment for quite a while and ended up revising their entire course sequence. That's not something you need to do every term. That's kind of like just to set that expectation. No one needs to think about revising their whole sequence every term, but maybe over several years, your department starts to use learning outcomes assessment to think about broader curricular changes. For this one, just for my example, I'll say no programmatic or curricular implications, which is also possible. Then I would provide any more details, indicate any college-wide implications that might be related to like prerequisites, any courses that I teach that are cross-listed with other programs, any professional development or research that I'm requesting. I can put that all in this box. And then finally, there is the option to upload a file. It's not required, but if you wanted to provide, for example, the data you're using to conduct your assessment, you could put it there for your peers to look at. This is administrative things that should not appear on your end. I'll go ahead and hit save. And now I kind of get this snapshot of what I submitted. Only the person who submitted this should be able to edit it. Just as a side note, I'm going to go back into my course assessments. I'll go back to my sandbox. And when I hit previous assessments for that course, you'll see I did not fill out these text boxes, so they are blank, but this is the assessment that I just submitted on January 15th. And it just stacks below all the previous assessments here. I'm going to pause for a second and go back to that form, just in case there are any questions. And I'll invite my other panelists or members of Ensuring Learning, if you're here, to also share if you have anything important to share about this form.
Can you, and not that we would do someone else's assessments, but just since you have your admin role and for those in instruction, maybe it'd be helpful to also just pick on a random course, just so they can see how the course student learning outcomes get imported from the curriculum system. We port your data over, as Katie mentioned, from Socrates. And so whatever is currently in catalog, that's why we do it annually after the academic year, once all changes have been approved through curriculum. We put them, we import them, and that includes the language as it's written regarding your student learning outcomes. So if we were to go back one more, Katie, and just pick, yeah, we'll be able to share the link, Sean. And Katie's also developed in CIPS video tutorials to walk you through it. And since Jason's here, we'll pick on bio. But so as you can see across the header of each of the learning outcome areas, it's ported over and pre-populates each of the learning outcomes for that given course. And I just thought this might be handy because on the other end, we know that curriculum, and thanks, I see Carl in the group. Thanks for being here. When you submit changes or when you create a course, it's really important how you develop your student learning outcomes just as the seed of all this work. And the curriculum committee does have even a handbook on how you develop them. So for new faculty or for faculty that haven't had a chance yet or to introduce new courses, that I just wanted to make that reference along with this visual when you're doing your outcomes assessment. How you developed your learning outcome language is what gets ported over. We don't manipulate any of that. We bring it over exactly as it's written from Socrates.
Thanks, Sabrina. And yes, we will make sure to share campus-wide a link to this presentation and also to some of the existing video resources. If you are submitting, I saw a question about submitting an assessment and having a question. This tutorial will be much shorter and probably a more handy resource for just kind of on the fly knowledge as we need it. And we'll share that out at the same time as this recording. I'm going to pop over to program student learning outcomes assessment. And this is a little bit simpler than our course assessments, mostly because our course assessments can feed into our program assessments. So again, this will depend on your department. If you don't know how your department conducts its program level assessments, that's a great opportunity to have a dialogue together. But in theory, we'll be looking at all of our course assessments to inform our program level assessments. And it's the same thing if your program was not just created, it should be on this list. I'll scroll down to my sandbox, select an award for this program. I can see that this program has actually been assessed during our cycle, so I might choose to look at that link. It's been assessed several times. So that does not override, but if I wanted to submit a new assessment, I would come in here, I would list the participating members again, and I'm going to say, for the sake of example, student learning overall. I think it was a little bit below expectations because I do not understand the basic rules of baseball. What did you learn generally from your outcomes assessment? That's where dialogue as a department can be super useful. And again, as we're focused on continuous improvement with our assessments, what are the instructional changes you will make based on your assessments? So this is where looking at our whole overall for this AA, kind of when I was sharing, there was an example of programs who've redone their entire curriculum for that program. That might happen, but you also might have smaller things, such as equipment or supplies, professional development. These are, again, all options here. I'll say PD for this one. And then for myself and my peers in the future, and also for my dean, my chair, and the folks who will be submitting resource requests. This is where I'll want to fill out this box. Please describe the changes you will make and maybe why they will help your students achieve these outcomes. Because that narrative really becomes useful when we're submitting resource requests and asking for data-based resources. We have this evidence to point to. Our students maybe are struggling with outcome 3. Our peers at other colleges have this technology that seems to be helping their students master the content, and we would like that as well for our students, just as an example. It does ask when you plan to complete the changes, just as a guesstimate. I'll say it'll take me 2 years. So a shorter form, I'll hit save. And if I go back to our program assessment, I'll now see that I have an additional assessment here from January 15th. And for the sake of time, I'm going to show the Student Services Program Assessment, the Service Area Outcomes Assessment form for them. It is the same for administrative and instructional support services. So this applies to you all as well. If I go to our sandbox, it's a little different for our support programs because we do not have a curricular process. We add our outcomes directly in this form, and we can also edit them here. So Paul keeps adding outcomes related to baseball. I don't like that. I'm going to archive this particular outcome, get more runners on base. And when I do that, I now only have one outcome adopting all of the Huskies, and that better fits my program as it is today. So here we can edit, we can also add new outcomes. I'll have a new outcome. That was a terrible way to write an outcome. I'm sorry, Carl. There's a whole guide about how to write outcomes to serve students. That was not a good example. But for the sake of time, we'll leave it. And we now have 2 outcomes here. And then same thing as for instructional areas, I can submit a report for one of these. I've got the same thing, my participating members, a smaller set of options for the data that I'm using, direct observation, analysis of program records, and staff assessment of program effectiveness. These are all things that I've seen in our support services areas, and we can work together on what applies best for assessing your outcomes. I'm going to say program records here, and very similarly describe what activities specifically inform the assessment, and importantly, what did you learn? And that's really what I'll emphasize for everyone, instructional or support programs. That's the key thing, that's why we do assessment, is what are our outcomes for our students? How are they meeting them? And really, what did I learn in reflecting upon how students are achieving these outcomes? For the sake of time, I think for this particular outcome, which was adopting all of the Huskies, I'm definitely going to need to think about my workload for that one. And then I can write a description of the changes I'll make based on that assessment. I'll go ahead and save that. And when I view my reports, I see that I submitted this assessment on this date. So that's all good to go. That is the conclusion of my demonstration. And before we head over to our panelists to kind of hear more specifically how various departments are going through this process, I just want to make sure that there aren't any kind of logistical questions about CIPS, about any of these forms. If those do come to you, feel free to just raise your hand at any point as we continue with the presentation. Okay, so backing up to our co-panelists today, thank you so much for being here. Jason did let me know. I apologize if the biology department chair is in this meeting right now. Jason is no longer the biology department chair, so apologies. Um, he is, however, our academic senate vice president. So thank you for taking the time for being here. I'm just going to kind of start with our first question for all of you. And I've asked the panelists to kind of just chime in where they think they can lend their voice and their experiences. So I'll let this kind of happen naturally. But for our panelists, why do you participate in learning outcomes assessment? And we talked a lot about accreditation today, but do you find any meaning beyond that kind of checkbox of accreditation? Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, excuse me. I just raised my hand because I didn't want to create pandemonium if everybody started jumping in at one time. So, I mean, accreditation is one thing, and I want to go back to something that you had said earlier on in your presentation about, the people who are involved in the accreditation process. And I'm also on the IE committee, so I've had, a really good introduction as to what's happening with accreditation and strategic planning. I'm still learning a lot. Katie, you're, chairing that. Sabrina's involved with that. I don't know if anybody else from IE is here, but there is a lot of work that goes into that strategic planning process, and they do take into account everything that we do as departments through our program review process and coming up here soon our COB process. But outside of accreditation and why I participate, one, with the bio department, we do have a lot of cooperation within our department. We have a pretty good sized department at this point. I think we're up to 12 faculty members. By no means the largest, but we also understand that we do have a lot of minds that we can tap into, and we utilize that with everything that we do. And the program review process being one of them, it's a fluid type of documentation. It doesn't have to be something where you leave it to the last minute, get it all done, and then not think about it for a while. And we're thinking about it constantly through throughout each semester, whether it's from new equipment that we need, new cadavers that we need. Some of you might be thinking, oh my gosh, cadavers, there's really cadavers. Yes, we have cadavers that we utilize for our anatomy physiology. What types of interactions do we need with other parts of the campus? So we invite Katie and Paul in quite often to help us understand the data that we are looking at. So participating in those learning outcomes assessments, if you're doing that just for the accreditation side of things, I think you're missing out on a lot of what you can do to improve your department, your class, your area for that matter. So with SME, we try to keep in contact with other, physics, chemistry, math. So, it does allow us to see what's happening, not just in our department, but what do we need to do to collaborate with other departments within the area to make sure that our scheduling, goes off with the, minimal hitches every time our semester, comes up. And it just allows us, I think, to understand what each of us is doing as an individual instructor throughout that process, since we do divide that program review process and those learning outcome assessment categories up amongst our group. We get the ideas from everybody about how we can improve what we're seeing from semester to semester and from one program review process to the next. So, we don't just see it as part of the accreditation process that we are required to provide. It's something that we're constantly learning from. So, I think if we all think about it in those terms as something that we can continue to look at throughout the gaps in between each individual time frame, I think that's something that really does benefit everybody.
Thank you, Jason.
I wanted to I'm Shara, I'm in the nutrition department. I wanted to kind of echo Jason's thoughts on that. We do the same thing with our department where everybody gets involved and it's very collaborative and it just has so much more meaning than just for accreditation. So we also utilize that each semester and just have data and see what we can improve on. And it's just very helpful. So we also kind of utilize it in that way to help improve each semester, see if there's differences between modalities and what we can do better. So it's just extra data that's super helpful in summary.
I can jump in for a minute. Hi, everyone. I'm Maisie Inc., art history faculty. In some ways, I have the opposite situation than Jason and Shara. We have a lot of classes in the art department that only one faculty member teaches. So if we don't do the assessment process, that course will not be assessed. And that, of course, is really helpful, as everyone has said, in the planning for future offerings of that course. I've also personally found the process really helpful as a way to check in and look at the semester overall and inform any changes I'm making for future courses. I find that sometimes hard to do in the moment throughout the semester, but once a semester's ended and I go through this process, it allows me to see the whole and make adjustments for future offerings of the course.
Thank you so much, Shara and Maisie. Yolanda, do you have anything to share on this one? No requirement.
No, I just want to say it says learning outcomes. I do more program assessment. And I want to share that the reason we in DSPS, I'm with the DSPS program, which is a student services program, I do it. I find a lot of meeting. I really hadn't thought of the connection with accreditation, but it always has been connected. But I do it more to just review what are those 5 top things that our program needs to achieve. And this year, I thanks to Katie, I reframed.
Is that my internet?
I think we lost Yolanda.
Okay,
Yeah, we don't
Yeah,
know.
I lost it also.
we'll
Yeah.
come back to Yolanda. I will move on to our second question, and then we will circle back to Yolanda when she returns. How does your department collaborate? So I heard about various forms of collaboration. Can any of you share more specifically how your department collaborates to complete your assessments?
We just went through ours last spring, so I can expand a bit on our process. As I said, I'm art history. We're in a combined department with our art studio program. We only have 2 full-time professors, myself and Robin Johnson, who's our current art department chair. And it was the first time Robin and I were both going through this program review process. We had never done it before. And I know Robin met with Katie and had a really helpful meeting of how to go through the process, which you all actually got a version of that in the demonstration at the start of today. After Robin met with Katie, she created a very simple, I think it was just a 1-page PDF for all of our full-time and part-time faculty. And she sent that out to all of us. It was a step-by-step guide of how to interact with CIPS. We had the video tutorial as well. And then we assigned specific courses to the instructors who taught them, because we do have a lot of classes that only one person teaches from semester to semester. And then we were all responsible for getting our assessments in. One thing that we had talked about a lot, and I'm also on the Ensuring Learning Committee, and we've talked about a lot in the art department, the majority of our faculty is part-time. So we wanted to make sure that they're getting compensated for doing that assessment work. And I think Katie had a note about that earlier in the slides as well. But that's been our process most recently for the art department.
Thank you, Maisie. So assigning specific folks to specific courses.
Yeah, in biology, so we went through and we created lead instructors for each of our courses. So again, when you have a department that has that opportunity, we can take advantage of that. So for example, I'm the lead instructor for Biology 102, which is our kind of survey with lab of the entire anatomy and physiology topic. And with that, I also am responsible for interacting with any adjuncts that are teaching the course. So throughout any of the semesters, it's my responsibility to check in with those adjuncts. So we try as best we can to make sure that we stay on top of that communication. And then we can then use what we have gleaned from them in the outcome assessment process. Because sometimes, when you have adjuncts coming in, sometimes they're consistent, but sometimes, they are, we might not have an assignment for a particular adjunct. So it's important to get their feedback when they are on assignment so you can see what's happening with their particular section of a course. So when it comes time to doing those outcome assessments, we can then take those notes and incorporate that into the outcome assessment. So even though we do collaborate as a group, we do also kind of separate out each of those courses based on those lead instructors, but we are always, going back and forth. And, if we have any questions about, hey, how can I improve this? What do you see in this particular data set that I'm not seeing? If we have any questions about that. And then, we will also use our individual student success data as well, not necessarily putting that data into the assessment report, but just to kind of give ourselves a better idea of what we might need to do better. Again, whether it's scheduling or, adjusting our lab schedules, things like that, or what we're incorporating, I should say, as lab activities. But yeah, sometimes it can be tricky. And again, I understand where Maisie's coming from when you have, a lot of adjuncts teaching your courses, and you might have just single instructors teaching those individual courses. It definitely takes a group effort to make sure that you stay communicating with one another. But again, in our department, we do have specific lead instructors that are responsible for starting each of those individual assessment processes.
So I can chime in. So our department, we have 2 full-time faculty and we have 6 adjuncts. And what we do is we analyze our course learning outcomes each semester. So everybody does it with the adjuncts and us as the full-time faculty. And it's just kind of we came in doing that, the nutrition department before me and the other full-time or got hired. This was what they had been doing. So it's been an ongoing, we're just kind of continuing with it, and it's been very beneficial. So each semester we have a Google Excel sheet, and of every course, we list the modality. Is it 8-week? How many students do we have? And at the end, how we're analyzing each assignment for the different CSLOs, and then we have them write in detail how they're analyzing it. So we can see, like, is it a specific assignment? What's going on? Because there's so much that you can use. You have grades, you have course analytics, they have the CSLOs built into Canvas. So there's a lot of different things that sometimes people have, preferences for using. So we try to do that. And then everyone does a written analysis as well. So we'll put all our data in the Google Excel sheet. And then we have a separate Google form that has questions that are similar to what's in CIPS, like did you meet expectations? Are there anything you want to improve on? Are you going to do any changes? Things like that. So it's very helpful for us as full-time faculty to later go in and then combine all the data and put it into CIPS. So we have it due before the start of the next semester, and we do it for every fall and spring. And then it's nice, we go over the data at the following meetings. So we'll go over the spring data in our fall meeting, and we'll just kind of discuss it. And it's really nice because we can all collaborate and be like, oh, wow, like you had improvement in your course learning outcomes. Like, did you try anything new? And we get ideas. So we make it very collaborative, and it's just been very helpful and nice to have that data and have the consistency. And it's just kind of expected, and we have the due dates and we kind of know what to do. So that's how our department does it.
Thank you so much. So we have a question in the chat from Melissa. Thanks, Melissa. Is it possible to share some examples of how this information is being collected from faculty? So PDF, Google Sheets, survey, etc. And I know you don't have to, none of you have to share screen because it probably has maybe sensitive information in it, but can you articulate kind of how you're collecting data from others in your department to then input into the assessment form?
I wonder if I could put together like a template that I could send to you later, Katie, and then I don't know if you could send out to people that want it or something. Because we just kind of list every single course and then just have the different columns for the CSLOs and add in the percentages. And then below has kind of every course listed again, the instructor, how they analyzed it. So you can kind of like scroll down and see things. But yeah, I think it'd be good to have an example if I could do that.
That would be awesome. And I can certainly help with creating the template. So you and I can work on that. I don't want to create more work for you.
No, that's fine.
Jason or Maisie, do you have anything to add in terms of physically collecting information from folks?
And with us, we don't necessarily physically collect anything, though, in the sense that I think Shara has been doing with her department. But I mean, we utilize our Canvas as one tool just to kind of see what overall grades have been, and we do. Some of us may. I'm not saying that we don't keep notes on what we're doing in our classes. I'm pretty sure we do have some faculty members who do keep copious notes as to how their semester goes. But it's a lot of using, I think Hawk Dash, we're using that quite a bit, but also just, again, outcomes as they come through with each individual course and keeping kind of a mental note as to what's happening within especially because we have labs that we do quite a bit with biology. So we're paying attention to how the students are reacting to the different lab activities that we have in place. We are reacting to how they prepare their lab reports, their answers from their free response questions on our assessments. So there's a lot of different things that I wouldn't even really be sure how to collect all that type of data in a way that's simple, I guess you could say. So a lot of it does come down to what we see happening in the classroom from semester to semester. I will have notes from time to time in my classes if I notice something that just has not worked very well, so I can include that in my assessment, and I understand I need to change that within my own class. But yeah, we don't have anything formally set up in that sense through a spreadsheet to collect any specific outcome data in that regard.
Yeah, I would echo what Jason said. We don't have a specific way to collect that, especially because we have so many people individuals doing just their specific classes. I've done the same thing Jason was saying, where when I'm doing mine, I'm using a lot of different data and anecdotal things from the students. Most recently, what I found really helpful is doing a self-assessment at the start of the semester that's like 10 questions that I've created based on the SLOs. It's in more student-centered language. It's a little easier to follow than some of the SLOs and how they're written. And I give them the same assessment at the last day of class. And so I can kind of use that self-assessment tool as part of my own assessment. And then I usually use that in conjunction with specific assignments, sometimes even like one specific question within an assignment that really fits with an SLO. So I'm usually using a combination of data points as I'm completing the SLO assessment.
Thank you so much. I think those were three really good examples of how everyone kind of does this differently. Everyone has different levels of staffing. And so one template may not work for every department, but we have kind of different examples, and the Ensuring Learning Committee is working on collating those examples to share with everyone across campus. Yolanda, if you are able to share with us, I want to make sure we don't miss what you were going to say about why you participate in assessment.
Yes, apologies, everybody. I'm going to turn off my video. Just, I don't know what was happening that I got dropped off, but I'm glad to be here. Just want to say, oh, just want to echo, you mentioned accreditation. We do it because we have a limited allocation, so we need to always look at resources like refreshing all our computers every periodically. So we do it for funding reasons. We want to see how we're doing and where we need to improve so we can identify the resources, especially if we can't pay for them with our type of categorical funding. So just wanted to wrap up that part. But I loved hearing what learning outcomes folks are using. Going back to that one on just, I think you're on the topic of what kind of examples of data is that where you are, Katie?
Yes, yeah, if you have
Yeah, but
specific
thank you.
examples.
Yes, I just want you to know we go off a survey. So like we did a new student orientation, kind of brought students actually to campus this summer, and we asked them for feedback after it. And so we collected that, we inputted that in there. So I work with my classified professionals to get that data. And also just seeing growth over time. Our learning services, our learning disabilities program has seen a growth in students coming to get assessed. And so we want to capture that for purposes of maybe future adjuncts helping in LD. So I'm gathering that from my colleagues. So I sit with the colleagues to gather information on what are some assessments we can add and going over those areas, those outcome areas that we define.
Thank you so much. Those are two really good examples of data for some of our student support areas, student surveys. That also applies to our instructional areas. Maisie was sharing about a student self-assessment. And then also just data about utilization of services and enrollment in programs. Thank you, Yolanda. I'll move on. If anyone can speak to, if I know that a lot of you recently got involved with assessment at CRC. So do you have any advice for folks who are doing assessment work for the first time?
Schedule a meeting with Katie.
Absolutely. I echo that. Multiple meetings if necessary. Again, with us in the biology department, we don't hold back on that. We have had, again, Katie and Paul in our department meetings several times for multiple different things. But get it started early. Don't wait. I mean, it seems like, I think sometimes it might seem like, oh, learning, student learning assessment or outcomes assessments. Yeah, we can get that done pretty quick. Well, if you're not into the system early and you don't know what it looks like and you don't know what the different prompts look like, if you're waiting to the last minute, you might not quite understand what those prompts mean, which again, have a meeting with Katie, because there was a workshop a couple semesters ago, I think it was, where I think it's Katie and Paul they were conducting that one, and we went in and Eric and Neff and I were going in for a program review type thing, but we were kind of spinning our wheels as to how to answer a particular question. And when we asked, "What are you looking for in this question?" really the answer was, or the input was a lot more simple than what we were trying to come up with. So I think having that background information of what are we expected to provide. Sometimes I think we can overthink what is going to go into that particular section. And that's probably a good thing, that we don't want to over analyze something, because that can kind of muddy the waters a little bit. But yeah, definitely starting early and not waiting to the last minute, along with, again, having a good conversation with Katie about what's happening.
Marcus, I see your hand raised. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, no, thank you for doing this. Along those lines, if you're going through this the first time, consider if you're running into issues, if you're not finding your SLOs easy to assess, that may be a good reason for you to go back. And I know it's more of a curriculum piece, but to go back and revise your SLOs, both at the program level and at the course level. Many SLOs have, for example, multiple verbs that you might want to, and how can you assess something that's not necessarily, straightforward? So I do this regularly with the national organization in my field, and some of the things that we see are almost impossible to assess. So if you're finding that because somebody's done work in the past, that you say, well, there's multiple ways to interpret, there's multiple ways to do. That may be a good reason for you to go back and simplify and really truly look at what you want your students to know and how you can then really get at those details.
Oh my gosh, Marcus, thank you so much for sharing that. What good advice. And for those of you who are in the fortunate position of having a brand new program, what a gift to be able to write your course and program learning outcomes from the start, thinking about how you'll evaluate them, how you'll design your course activities and assignments around those outcomes with student learning in mind. For those of us for whom those are already established, it's a little bit harder to go back, but that's always an option, is to maybe sit down as a department and do one at a time. So I'm so glad you shared that, Marcus. Thank you. I was hoping the answer wouldn't be for everyone to meet with me, but I do have office hours and I'll make sure to share those out. They've been in a few emails already. Finally, just to wrap up, is there anything else that our panelists or anyone else on this call would like to add about conducting learning outcomes assessments?
I think, especially if you have any new faculty in your department, to make sure that, when you're going through this stuff, don't just start the process. Really make sure that you incorporate them in that and that they understand why we're doing this and how to get that done. I know, I'll come back to our department. I mean, from the very beginning, they were all very accommodating when I first started. And no matter how many times I asked questions, or my mentor, who I believe is on this particular Zoom with us right now, Julie Oliver, she had a lot of great advice for me, trying to get me to speak up more in those meetings and to learn what's happening. But having a team that really, fostered that idea of collaboration and unity just in something like this really does help that new faculty member start to learn the process of enrichment and engagement within our campus. So making sure that you incorporate that aspect of things, because it's something that they're going to have to do for a while, hopefully a while, as they continue on with their eventual tenure with us. And it can be a very daunting thing. When I first started, all these different things that happened very early on, very quickly, with program review and whatnot, it was very overwhelming. So I think that would help ease their minds as they come into this new process and this new environment.
Thank you, Jason. And I'm personally really glad that our accreditor, that ACCJC, is so focused on meaningful assessment and less so just on numbers. I think that certainly helps make that connection to our accreditation and process and make it feel more meaningful, that we're actually talking about how we're using assessment to think about our offerings to students.
Sorry, I can't raise my hand, but I have a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead, Naomi.
With the change in course numbers, do we just treat those as two separate classes? Like whatever, when classes were as 300, we write it up in one place, and then when they switch to C1000, we write it up in another?
That's a great question. Am I correct that the outcomes have also changed? Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
So yeah, you'll need to switch over to assessing your new outcomes with the new course. And not all of those courses will be in CIPS yet, just because of the timing of when the Common Course Numbering course was approved. If you are one of our many faculty that this affects, I'd encourage you to work with me. There are times when I could maybe make your life easier by taking some of your information and porting it over. So yeah, you will need to switch over to the new course number and most likely entirely new outcomes that you'll need to assess and think about how you'll assess them. I did hear that there are some folks when they switch to the new course, there are now like 35 outcomes for a course. So if that is your situation, I learned some advice from your peers at Folsom Lake College recently, which was to think about the outcomes that rise to the top for you at CRC and for your CRC students. But maybe we'll do some follow-up for those programs that are affected by Common Course numbering. Yes, Marcus, I think I agree with you.
And that is a great question. Just echoing Katie's sentiments. Essentially, in theory, right? Like we're talking about the same course, but it's been updated to reflect the new Common Course numbering. That's AB 1111 for folks wondering. This is a huge lift across multiple higher ed systems within the state, across the community colleges, the UCs and CSUs. And so as those new naming conventions take effect, definitely we'll be doing our best to keep the system up to date. If your courses, obviously, if your courses if you have courses listed, as Katie mentioned in the very beginning, that aren't being taught or by that naming convention or just not being taught any further, those will eventually fall off the list of CIPS display. While at the same time, annually, we'll continue to update the curriculum. What we're trying to do is make sure that what we're updating it reflects all of the changes across the academic year that occur through the curriculum work happening from curriculum committee. As I mentioned, we download those from and import them from Socrates. And so, as you know, a lot of changes happened, and it's cleaner just to do it once and allows us to do quality control and check for changes, make sure they're populating as they're intended to in CIPS. And so, yes, definitely things will change. Those new naming conventions will replace. We're making sure on our data end that those courses reflect each other, right? So the new naming convention, for example, for English Writing 300 should also, that translates over to its new naming. And also along with the new assessments, if there are, new learning outcomes, if that language has changed as well to meet the criteria of the Common Course numbering policy. So I just thought I'd add that as well. Thanks, Katie.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. We are at time. I will definitely stick around for any specific questions. I've put a link in the chat to a survey from our professional development committee regarding Flex Week. If you could please take that survey about this particular session, I know it would help them out. My email is up on the screen. I'll also share follow-up information with all faculty about all the handy links that I have to help you with this process. And thank you all so much for engaging with student learning outcomes. It really, I know everything we do at CRC is about our students, but this in particular is so important to our students' learning. So I really appreciate you all. I know it is not an easy task. And so I admire the work that you're doing to get it done. Thank you very much.
Michael had a great question as folks are leaving. He just said, how often does this need to occur? And it's, we all would love a great deadline. The practice is very, it varies. If you look across the system, we're looking for regular and meaningful assessment, especially when you think, I guess my gauge would be if you're making curricular changes through curriculum review Or even if you're making tweaks, say you're like, oh, I think I'm going to try, oh, I'm adopting OER and I'm making this decision based on my assessment of my course, for example, that is an opportune time. Some faculty, as you heard across the panel, they do it semesterly, like every semester. Some do it every year, some do it every 2 years. What we're hoping for is that you don't go past what we do with program review. I mean, that's like really a low floor, right? Meaningful assessment probably happens much more frequently when you think about what Maisie shared. You're thinking about the feedback from your students and in your class and the data that you have with your course assessments, and how that informs how students are meeting those learning outcomes. And so definitely that can vary depending on the program, program requirements, program accreditation, et cetera. And so I think meaningful and regular assessment hopefully will not be greater than 6 years, but definitely more frequently is best as you continue to improve your quality of instruction. Marcus and others might want to chime in too. Shara and Jason, Maisie, Kate.
I guess to an extent it depends on how frequently things change in your field, right? So in a field like mine, we technically really should be doing things a bit more regularly than we are in my department. But you know that yeah, that's it. It really depends. But again, you know, if you're finding that your SLOs are behind, I mean, you may have central places within your disciplines where you can look for those SLOs, that may be some standardization or something that may be happening across, utilize those. And, you know, if they change maybe, you know, 2-3 years, that might be a good time for you as well.
Thanks, Marcus.